Caught my husband cheating with my son's ex-girlfriend. Now she's pregnant and doesn't know if the father is him or my son. A few days ago, my entire world flipped upside down. My husband of 19 years asked me if we could sit down and talk. He said he needed to come clean about something, and he arranged with his mother to have the kids stay with her for the night. He had all of this planned while I was at work, so when I walked in the door around 6:45 p.m. and saw him sitting alone in the living room, looking nervous and unwell, my first thought was concern. I immediately started asking him where the children were, worried because usually by that time the whole family would be home and I hadn't received any messages explaining why they weren't. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He just reached out for my hands, then sat down again. In the quietest, most broken voice, he told me he was so sorry, that he never meant for this to happen, but he had cheated on me. I was in shock. My mind was still frantically searching for the kids, but there it was, he'd had an affair. He tried to start explaining himself but I couldn't really listen. All I could do was demand to know where our children were. At last, he told me that his mother was looking after them for the night. He asked me to calm down and just let him explain. I completely snapped at that. How could he expect me to calm down after dropping a bomb like this? What was there to explain? If he wanted a divorce, why didn't he just ask months ago, instead of tearing apart everything we'd built? He started crying, begging me to please just listen. He said there was more to the story and he didn't choose for this to happen. My head was spinning. I walked straight outside to my car and just sat there, sobbing uncontrollably. He followed me to the door, crying himself, pleading over and over for me not to leave and to please just listen. I sat in my car, with tears streaming down my face, thinking about our marriage, our children, everything we'd built across 22 years, and what would become of us now. Was this the end? Divorce? Counseling? Could I ever really forgive him? And the burning questions: why did he cheat? Who was she? Why was she better than me, worth more than all of this? After maybe an hour of spiraling and breaking down, I managed to pull myself together, ready at least to hear his explanation and demand answers. I went back inside and knocked on the door. He opened it right away and reached for my hand, desperate. I stopped him when he tried to lead me upstairs. We were talking this through downstairs, where it was safe, neutral ground, or he could leave. I was already bracing myself for whatever he had to say, beyond apologies and excuses. He told me the affair started 6 months ago. At first, he claimed it was just secret messages. He said he wasn't flirting, but that she became more direct and flirty, and during a night when I was working away, they slept together for the first time. That was supposedly 4 months ago, although I can't help feeling they've been intimate regularly since. I bombarded him with questions: why, who, how, every how could you I could muster, hardly letting him answer before spiraling into another wave of disbelief and pain. And then he told me it was Emily. At first the name meant nothing. I almost laughed and asked if I was supposed to know who that was. And then he said, James Emily. My heart stopped. James is our 18-year-old son. Emily, 19, is his ex-girlfriend, as of 2 months ago. I felt rage consume me. I screamed at him to get out, told him not to come near me, unable to comprehend how he could betray not just me but our child like this. I couldn't stand to even be in the same room with him, let alone listen to him try to justify having an affair with our son's ex-girlfriend, the same young woman who'd once been so welcome in our home. I had liked her, grown fond of her. All of us had been sad when she and James broke up 2 months prior, even his little siblings mentioned missing her. He told me the reason he was coming clean now was that Emily had confided in him 2 weeks ago that she was pregnant, but didn't know whether the father was him or James. My husband claimed he hadn't wanted any of this, didn't initiate things, tried to keep his distance, but he just wasn't strong enough mentally. I couldn't listen to another excuse. I left, driving 30 minutes away and checking into a hotel with my phone turned off. The next morning I went into work as if nothing had happened and only came home late. The kids were once again not home and there he was by the door, eyes red, waiting for me, begging to talk. I just walked to our room and collapsed on the bed, feeling empty, powerless, numb. He came after me, crying and desperate. I'm not naive enough to believe it was all her doing, that this 19-year-old girl pursued and manipulated a grown man more than twice her age. To put the blame solely on a teenager, someone who, until just recently, was our son's girlfriend, it's sickening. He didn't act alone, and hearing him try to push all the responsibility onto her makes me more disgusted than I thought possible. Now, a few days later, on the surface, things look normal for the sake of our children. James doesn't know about the affair or the possible pregnancy. The kids are all back, my husband and I barely exchange words unless they're around. Sharing a bed with him now is revolting. Even in front of the children, he tries to cuddle me or kiss me, and I can't bear it. I feel nothing but animosity. I'm terrified that the depression I defeated in my teens will swallow me whole all over again. I find myself wanting to cry everywhere, my heart shattering not just for myself, but for the family we built. I know James needs to know, and sooner is better than later, but I don't know if I'm strong enough to be there for both of us right now. How do I even begin to unravel this mess? When is the right time to tell him? I know it's foolish to imagine I could keep this a secret just until Christmas passes, but I'm totally lost. It feels like there could never be a right time. I'm consumed with fear not just for myself, but for the aftershocks this will cause, between James and his father, and for our 2 younger children. I'm lost, mourning the life I thought I had, and feeling utterly broken, trying to keep everything afloat for the children while the ground gives out beneath me. I'm sorry, but it appears you've only included a small portion of text, rather than the full story or update you'd like me to rewrite. Please provide the entire story or update you want me to rewrite, and I'll be glad to transform it according to your instructions. Update 1. After everything that happened, I felt like my world had been pulled out from under me. For anyone who's not familiar, my husband of 19 years confessed to a 6-month affair with our eldest son James' ex-girlfriend. When the affair started, she was still his girlfriend. The blow left me reeling and scrambling to figure out my next steps, but through it all, my children's well-being remained at the forefront of my mind. The night after I learned the truth and finally let reality settle over me, I waited until my kids were in their rooms and then sat down with my husband. My emotions were a tangled mess: anger, grief, fear, but above all, I knew I couldn't just go on as if nothing had happened. I told him, calmly but firmly, that I no longer felt safe or comfortable sharing a bed with him. He needed to come clean to James about what he'd done. James deserves the truth, no matter how awful it was going to be to hear it. I made it clear that I was immediately seeking a therapist, both for myself and for James. Some people had suggested that James should be told in the presence of a professional who could help support him, and I decided that was the right thing to do. My husband sat there in silence. I could see in his eyes that maybe for the first time, the gravity of what he'd done was starting to crash down on him. Eventually he just said he'd get a hotel for the night, and stay with family or friends for the time being. The next day, I managed to speak with a therapist. After crying it out with my sister and walking through every detail, together we decided James needed to know as soon as possible. I'd already been holding on to this unbearable secret for a week and I couldn't keep it from him any longer. My sister took the younger 2 kids for the day. They were reluctant to go, clearly sensing something was wrong, but I assured them that everything would be explained soon and, above all, that we would be okay. I hugged them tight and tried to steel myself for what was to come. With the house quiet, my husband sat down with James. He managed to tell him the basics of what had happened, this time minus the excuses or the desperate pleas for forgiveness he'd tried on me. James went completely silent, his face an unreadable mask. After what felt like an eternity, my husband left the room to give us space. I will never share the specifics of James' reaction, because those feelings are his own, but it was clear the betrayal had cut him deeply. We spent a long time just being there for each other, holding on, trying to process waves of pain. Eventually, James went to lie down, and my husband gathered his things and left. Later that evening, when my sister dropped the younger 2 home, their father returned and sat them down to explain in broad strokes that he had an affair, and that it was with James' ex-girlfriend. For now, we chose not to tell them about a possible pregnancy. There are too many uncertainties, especially around paternity, and they were already dealing with enough. I'm handling the affair and the possible pregnancy as 2 separate nightmares. James and I both got tested for STDs, so far, all negative, but we're waiting on full results. With thoughts swirling about this potential pregnancy, my only focus right now is supporting James, while letting my husband handle his own choices. James has already reached out to Emily about doing a paternity test, but he hasn't shared with me how he'll feel if it comes back positive. We agreed to take things one step at a time, because anything else feels too overwhelming. As for me, therapy has become my anchor. I'm so grateful I was able to take some time off work to focus on my own healing and my kids. Once we have the paternity results, then I'll allow myself to deal with the divorce. One trauma at a time is all I can manage right now for my mental health, and I need to be fully present for my children. I have seen a lawyer for an initial conversation, just to know my rights and what to expect, but haven't made any moves yet. My children are, and always will be, my priority. The only contact I've had with my husband since all of this is the occasional message about the kids. When it comes to the next step, I'm seeking any advice for how to navigate a divorce when children are involved. I want to protect them from as much pain as possible so someday, we can all move on from this mess. This whole nightmare is so grotesque and surreal. Unprotected sex with our son's ex-girlfriend, now the possibility of a pregnancy that could have an unthinkable outcome. If she chooses to keep the baby, everyone involved will be left to carry the haunting shame and confusion. Yet somehow, I have to hold this family together while I pick up the shards of what we once had. If there's anything I know right now, it's that my first obligation is to my kids and myself, not to repairing whatever's left between my husband and our children. That relationship will unravel, or not, on its own, but I will do everything in my power to lead us towards healing. Update 2. The results came back faster than my heart was ready for. I was slicing apples for the younger 2 when the email lit up my phone, and my hands started shaking so badly the knife clattered into the sink. James was home. I called him into the kitchen and we opened it together. No speeches, no pep talks. Just the 2 of us and the truth on a small screen. It wasn't him. A 0% probability. And a 99.9% match with his father. I watched my son's face go through every season at once, shock, a flash of relief so brief it hurt to see, and then a kind of grief I don't have a word for, like a tether snapping in a place you can't reach. He leaned over the counter and gagged like he might throw up, then slid down the cabinet and sat on the floor with his head in his hands. I wanted to gather him up like a little boy, like I did when he was 5 and bleeding from the chin, but he's not a little boy and I'm not sure there's a mothering gesture big enough for this. He didn't scream, didn't break anything. He stood up eventually, washed his face at the sink, and told me he was going to his aunt's for a couple days. He hugged his brother and sister in the hallway and told them he had a group project, the kind with late nights, and he'd be back after the weekend. When he was leaving, he looked at me for a long time like he wanted to say something and then said nothing at all. I watched his taillights disappear and then sat on the steps and pressed my palms to my eyes until I saw stars. My husband came by that evening to see the younger two. I met him at the door with a printout in my hand. He tried to put on that hangdog face that used to mean something to me and said my name like it was a prayer. I stepped back and told him he could see the children in the living room and nowhere else. He stared at the paper, swallowed, and said he'd already heard from Emily. For a second the image of the two of them sharing a moment over this news twisted in my stomach and I actually felt a sharp, ridiculous stab of jealousy for the first time in this whole nightmare, and then I hated myself for it. When the kids came in he put on his father voice and asked about school and I stood there and watched this person who helped me carry them out of delivery rooms act like a visitor. It was an hour after he left that my phone rang again and Emily's name lit up my screen. I hadn't spoken to her since the day this all exploded. She hadn't tried to contact me. Her voice was small and hoarse. She said she was bleeding and scared. She said she didn't want to go alone and didn't want to call him. I stood in the middle of my kitchen, still holding a dish towel, and said okay. My sister came over and fell into her usual role of emergency fairy godmother and I drove to Emily's apartment with a jacket over pajamas and my hair in a knot so tight it hurt. In the ER waiting room, everything smelled like antiseptic and fear. She was curled on a chair, pale, a sweatshirt swallowed her, and when she saw me she started crying like a younger girl. I handed over tissues because I didn't know what else to offer. You'd think I would have hated her on sight, but that's so easy when someone is just a story in your head. Up close she was 19 again, and trembling, and not the villain my mind made her to keep me angry enough to function. We were still waiting when he showed up. Of course he did. Maybe she texted him too, maybe he has some radar for disasters now. He walked in with that frantic look he gets when he's about to fix something with 10 words and a hug. I stood up and met him halfway and told him very quietly that if he came near her, I'd ask security to remove him. He looked past me to her and said her name and his voice cracked, and then he looked back at me and there must have been something in my face because he took a slow step back and put his hands up. He sat in the far corner and stared at his knees. They did an ultrasound. I stood behind a pale curtain and stared at a tile floor and listened to the tech talk in a gentle voice. There was a heartbeat. Steady. The bleeding was not catastrophic, they told her. Rest. Hydrate. Follow up with her OB. While we waited for discharge papers, she told me about telling her mother, and how her mother told her father, and how her father told her to get out. She was staying with a classmate until she could sort herself. She said she hadn't told James about the bleeding because he hadn't responded to her last message and she thought he hated her anyway and I said nothing because I refused to be a spokesperson for my son's pain. On the drive back to her place she asked me why I came. I told her I didn't know. Which is true and not true. I went because I did not want my husband to be the only parent figure in that room. I went because if this baby was going to exist in the world, I didn't want its first brush with family to be a man who couldn't keep any of his vows straight. In front of her building, she put her hand on the door handle and then just sat and looked at me. She said he'd told her he was going to leave me. He'd told her he and I were practically separated. He'd told her he and James were already distant. She said it blandly, like reading lines from a grocery list, like she'd already discovered how useless those promises were. Then she dug in her bag and handed me her phone and asked me if I wanted to see the messages. She scrolled without looking, her thumb moving like it belonged to someone else, and there they were, months of a man I had thought I knew constructing a life out of lies, scheduling hotel rooms I never knew about, telling her she was the only person who saw him. There was a message, dated the day after I found out, telling her to please just take care of it before it gets worse. I felt my skin go cold. I handed her the phone back and told her to screenshot everything and email it to herself and then not to send them to me, not yet. That even if a lawyer wanted them, a mother did not. The next morning I told our 2 younger kids that their dad would be living somewhere else for a while, and that sometimes this happens with grown-ups. I didn't say the word affair. I didn't say anything about babies. I watched their faces the way you watch a storm come in, wondering what it will knock down and what it will spare. Our youngest asked if they did something wrong. I said absolutely not and I meant it so hard my voice shook. I told them their dad loves them. I did not say anything about the shape of that love. I met with my lawyer again and I signed papers. There is a petition now with my name and his name on it and a list of facts that look so bare on paper they might as well be someone else's life. I asked for the house, at least for now, and primary custody, and a very clear parenting app for all future communication. The process server called me from his car in our driveway and told me he'd handed over the envelope. I watched from my bedroom window as my husband stood there and turned the packet over in his hands like it might tell him some other story if he just held it from a different angle. He didn't look up at the house. His mother came over unannounced that evening, her cardigan buttoned wrong and a cake in a box like we were having a wake. She looked older, smaller. She sat on the edge of my sofa and cried the way my son cried, silent and total. Then she told me she'd known about inappropriate closeness for months and had begged him to stop, and when he didn't, she told herself it wasn't her place to meddle in her grown son's decisions. She said she should have told me. I think she wanted me to absolve her. I told her I didn't have absolution to give. She asked if she could still see the children and I told her yes, because despite everything she has been a good grandmother and I won't weaponize the only stable love they have left. James came back home the next day with a trash bag of laundry he didn't get to at his aunt's. He hugged me at the door for so long I thought my knees might give out. He said he'd seen Emily to tell her he was relieved and devastated and that he hoped she would be okay, and then he blocked his father on everything. He said he doesn't know if that will be forever. I told him he didn't have to know. He asked me if I would ever forgive him, meaning his father, and I told him I wasn't interested in the kind of forgiveness that looks like forgetting. Later, when the younger two were at a birthday party and the house was unusually quiet, the doorbell rang again. It was Emily's mother. She did not bring a cake. She brought an envelope and a voice like a knife. She stood on my porch and told me that my husband had emptied out her daughter's savings account in installments, little bits over months, helping with books, helping with a deposit, and she had the transfers to prove it. She told me he had offered to put her daughter on his insurance and asked if I knew that. I didn't. She said she had spoken to a lawyer and to the police and to her pastor and then to me, because somehow we were both on the same barge now, being dragged down the same filthy river. Then her voice cracked and she said she did not know how to be a grandmother to the child of the man who had dismantled her family. I told her I didn't know how to be the wife of that man either. We stood there for a moment, two mothers who did not ask for each other, trying to breathe through it. At night I lie in a bed that feels too big and imagine the nursery that exists now in the realm of futures I did not choose. Some days I feel a fierce, clear anger that keeps me moving. Some days I feel only tired. And then there are moments that surprise me, like sitting in a fluorescent lit room, holding the hand of the girl who blew up my life, listening to the watery gallop of a heart I did not ask to love, and realizing I could, not as mine, never that, but as a child who will carry the residue of our failures if we don't do better than this. I don't know where we go from here. I'm not building a plan anymore so much as pulling one brick at a time out of a wall that never kept us safe. The papers are filed. The paternity is settled. The kids are tucked into their own routines, wobbly but moving. He sends short messages about drop-offs and pickups and the dog needing a new leash. I reply with times and dates, and feel every mile widening between the person I thought I married and the man who exists in these text bubbles now. Somewhere in the middle of the mess is a baby we didn't expect, and an entire network of people who are going to have to decide what kind of grown-ups they're going to be for it. I'm choosing to be the kind who opens a door when a scared girl calls me from an emergency room. I don't know what that makes me to anyone else. Right now, it's the only thing that makes sense. Update 3. The letter looked like junk mail, the kind you toss on the counter until it grows into a paper hill. I only opened it because my name was spelled wrong on the window and that always annoys me. Dependent add/change confirmation, it said in cheerful blue letters, and underneath, a name that wasn't mine or any of our children's. I read it twice and then a third time, as if the act of rereading could change ink. I put the kettle on because muscle memory insisted it was time for tea, and I stood there with the burner clicking under the kettle and the letter in my hand and this thin, ridiculous laugh in my throat that didn't make it all the way out. The letter congratulated us. It was so polite I wanted to set the kitchen on fire. There's a number for questions. I called it. A woman with a soft voice asked me to confirm my identity and then she asked if I was calling to remove the dependent or to update the address for the new domestic partner. I said the name again, slowly, and the silence that followed had edges. She put me on hold and when she came back she told me she would escalate it to the benefits administrator at his company. I hung up and took a picture of the page and sent it to my attorney. Keep the envelope, she wrote back. Postmark matters. By dinner time he was texting in those frantic bursts he uses when he's sure he can talk his way out of a fire, he said himself. Call me now. Please. I put my phone face down and stirred sauce until it burned and started over. A second number lit up, his mother, and then a third, unknown, that I let go to voicemail and it was HR asking me to confirm we were still married because of a discrepancy with the benefits filing. I said yes and then sat on the floor beside the pantry and pressed my forehead to my knees and tried to breathe like my therapist taught me, in counts of 4 that felt like lifting furniture. The temporary orders hearing was a week later and smelled like old coffee and dust and 100 other people's emergencies. I took my rings off the night the world flipped and I haven't put them back on. My finger still bears the pale indentation, a ghost of a circle. He was already there when we arrived, in a suit I last saw at a wedding when our life still looked like a set of coordinates we agreed on. He tried to catch my eye and I looked past him at the bulletin board listing probate matters and restraining orders and something about guardianships that made my stomach turn. My attorney spoke to me the way nurses speak before they put in a line, "This will pinch, it will be over soon." Inside, everything was strangely small. The judge had an ordinary voice and a pen he clicked while each of our attorneys said words that were technically about me and somehow not at all. He wanted 50-50 and every other weekend and holidays divided by exact hours. He said status quo like our lives had anything like that left. My attorney laid out the schedule the children already had, their schools and their part-time jobs, the way they slept better in their own beds, the paper from the insurance company with proof of his attempt to create a new household, and the dozens of messages we had printed where he begged and bullied and rewrote the plot line depending on who was listening. The judge didn't thunder. He just frowned in a way that made the room feel colder. He granted me exclusive use of the house and established a temporary schedule for the younger two that kept their weeks steady and their weekends predictable. He ordered us to use the app and to not introduce any romantic partners to the children during the pendency of the case. It was such a tidy little phrase for such a ruined thing. We came out into the hallway and I sat on a metal chair and texted my sister that it was done for now, and she sent back a picture of my youngest covered in pancake batter like a note from a different universe. He walked past us with his jaw set like he was chewing glass. He brushed my shoulder by accident or on purpose, and for a second I smelled his cologne and thought of our first apartment, a place with mice and a tube television, and then the elevator dinged and the moment broke like a cheap ornament. 2 days later the benefits department beat me to it. His paycheck landed thinner and then thinner still, and then a message came through the app that read like an accusation disguised as logistics. I've been put on leave. Congratulations. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood the shape of the blame he was throwing. When he came to pick up the kids for his allotted hours, he stood on the porch and said my name like he was asking for an extension on a project he forgot existed. I handed the children their backpacks and shut the door as gently as I could so I didn't end up slamming it. Emily's second appointment with the OB fell on the same morning as my eldest's exam. She texted me at 7 asking if I could come. Her mother was back speaking to her but had a shift she couldn't miss, and she didn't want to go alone. I dropped the younger two at school and drove across town with a bottle of ginger ale rolling around in the cup holder. In the waiting room there was a woven basket of outdated magazines and a framed poster about car seats. She sat with both hands low on her stomach like she was trying to hold herself together from the outside. When they called her name, she looked at me the way my daughter looked at me when the dentist snapped a rubber band onto her braces, a flinch she couldn't stop, and I went in. The ultrasound tech this time had a bright purple streak through her hair and the kind of steady small talk that keeps you from falling apart. We stared at the gray-black star chart and waited for the sound. There it was again, that underwater horse, that insistence. Everything looks good, the tech said, and then smiled at the screen. Do you want to know the sex? Emily looked at me like I could make this choice for her, and I shook my head. She nodded at the tech. Yes. It felt like a coin toss until it wasn't. A girl. The word hung in the room like a new color we now had to notice on everything. When we came out he was there, because somehow he is always where he shouldn't be. He was standing by the elevator with a bouquet that looked like it came from the grocery store, all cellophane and drooping lilies. Emily's face closed like a door. He said her name. I stood between them and the desk clerk looked up at me and then at him and then at nothing. He said he wanted to talk. I told him she had a ride and an appointment card she needed to take to the school office so her absence would be excused. He started to say I love, and then stopped because even he could hear how foolish it was to aim that word like a weapon in a hallway with a poster about gestational diabetes. He put the flowers down on a side table like they belonged to the building and left. In the grocery store that afternoon, I ran into his mother by the rotisserie chickens. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, and when she hugged me it was the hug of someone who knows hugs are the only currency that still works. He says you cost him his job, she said, trying for neutral, failing. I told her I did not cost him anything he hadn't already spent. She said she believed me, and I saw the exact moment she realized that believing me didn't make any of this easier. She put a chicken in my cart like that could fix dinner, and for once I let someone put something back into my life. That night he came to the house without a time scheduled and rang the doorbell until the dog went crazy. James answered because he was closest. I heard the low rumble of his voice become something hard. There are moments when boys become men, and you always imagine it's at a graduation or a signing of a lease. I watched it happen in our hallway under a smoke detector we never reset, my son standing in his socks telling his father to leave, his hand on the doorknob, his whole body a line that would not bend. I stood behind him, not touching, and dialed the non-emergency number with my thumb and hung up when his father took the hint and stepped backward into the porch light like a moth. On a Tuesday, Emily's mother came over again, this time without the knife in her voice. She had a folder under her arm and her hair pulled back so tight it looked like a headache. She sat at my table and we sorted through printouts of transfer receipts, notched in neat rows. It looked exactly like evidence and nothing like a story that made sense in our mouths. She told me she'd filed in small claims and talked to a detective who told her the worst thing about the law is the way it stops at the exact places you want it to keep going. We drank tea out of mugs that don't match and didn't cry, just reordered the pages so the dates made a spine. When she left she put her hand on my shoulder and said, "Thank you for the other night," and I understood that she meant the night at the hospital and also something larger, the thing where you don't let your worst selves be the only ones making choices. James came home with an application for campus housing for spring and told me he thinks he needs to try living somewhere that isn't wired with the last 20 years of his life. He said he wants to be able to come back here and not have it be the place where he found out, the place where the paper came in the mail. I told him I would help him move and meant both the boxes and the invisible weight. He asked me if I wanted him to come to the anatomy scan in a month and I said that decision should be between him and his own heart and the people who will be in that room. He said he might stand outside the door and listen for the sound and then go home. Later, alone, I opened the drawer where I keep the sheet sets and tucked the insurance letter envelope under the bottom stack. The house was quiet in that strange way where the quiet has texture because you know it won't last. I thought about nieces and daughters and the kinds of names girls carry like weather, and about how many daughters the choices of men create in 1,000 tiny ways. I thought about bringing a newborn into a world this tired and trying anyway to make a soft place for its head. He texted that night asking if he could talk outside the app, as if the app were the problem, as if moving this into air would somehow make it cleaner. I typed back exactly 2 sentences about pickup times and then set the phone face down on the counter and let it buzz itself out like a trapped insect. I keep bumping into the future in small, ridiculous places. A clearance end cap with a pink onesie that said hello, I'm new here in loopy font. A crib someone set out on their lawn with a cardboard sign that read free. Missing one screw. A YouTube video my daughter showed me of a woman turning her wedding dress into baptism gowns and me thinking briefly and then folding the thought back up and putting it away. I don't know if I will stand in a hospital again when this child finally arrives and add my stupid, stubborn love to the chaos of that hour. I don't know if employment will return for him before a judge decides what money means in the wake of this. I only know that today there is a girl on the other side of town measuring months in fruit sizes, and a son who set a boundary in the shape of a front door, and 2 younger kids who did their homework at the kitchen table, fighting over the good pencil. Some nights I fall asleep to the ocean noise app on my phone because the house sounds wrong. The other night I turned it off, and the silence was not empty. It was a room with the boxes labeled and stacked, a place where someone could come in and start again without thinking they are trespassing on a museum. When I get scared, I remind myself that the tea kettle still boils and the dog still needs to be let out and that every time I've thought I would shatter, I have become instead a different kind of instrument. Less breakable, maybe. Louder in the way that matters.